How many of you here just want to table or actually wanted to talk about OSASE? Raise your hand for the OSASE. I see Paul and Darius. Oh, okay, so we have a few. All right, just wanted to make sure. I don't know how many of you all have attended the meetings. Let me get rid of this. In the past. The one thing I think that came up last time, Darius, was, well, first off, what I was going to, if people have questions, we can just talk, or we can address some of the other things. So it's up to you all. Feel free to, if you have anything you want to bring it up, and we can talk about it. Otherwise, I was, in the last meeting, Darius, I believe that we had talked about potentially updating the charter. So I was thinking we should talk about that, and we can do that unless there's other business items. No? All right. Sweet. All right. Well, in that case, so largely this is the charter. Feel free to read it. So in the past few, I guess, months in the meetings, we've been discussing like balancing dependencies, both hardware and other stuff. But the one I wanted to talk about today was if removing the requirement that we would actually depend on a profile proper versus the SCE living on its own and then a future platform composing with a RISC-V profile plus the OSASE plus other architecture requirements. So I don't know what people think about that. Darius, I don't know if we have other mics up here, but if you wanted to talk, we can talk.
I mean, I think the proposal from Andre also kind of goes in a different direction, and that would kind of like require this change and perhaps other changes as far as is the SEE supposed to be the entirety of that interface between supervisor mode and what's below it, or is it supposed to be just a set of APIs that is really just one part of that full interface and doesn't include the profile, doesn't include any kind of peripherals or hardware or any other kind of support like that?
Yeah, that makes sense. So to give it a little bit of background, so ARM, so what the OSASE is trying to do is come up with something that operating systems and system implementers can come together with, so you have portability and that sort of thing, and off-the-shelf operating systems will work. And the way ARM composes their requirements is through a BSA, which is the base system architecture, which includes both behavior at a system level as well as ISA together. And they have different ISA options within different versions of their ISA. And then you have the BBR, which is more agnostic, which is the base boot requirements. And so the interesting thing there is when you look at that and try to do a side-by-side comparison with what RISC-V offers at the moment from a RVI standpoint, is that we have a profile and that is largely ISA components. There's a little bit of behavioral from a system level, but there's not much else beyond that but ISA, right? So the OSASE, if it's a perfect analog to a BBR, then it would be more agnostic in reference to, but then like defer to these other things, right? How you compose together. And so right now what we're missing, which is what I was hoping we can talk about later at the Priv software, even though it's not exactly Priv software, is basically how you bring and what people's thoughts are on designing a platform proper so that you can bring all the stuff together as a composition. And right now, like I said, we have a RISC-V profile that is just largely ISA, and we don't have all these other system architecture behavioral stuff laid out. And a lot of the other people, both RVI members and I think other distros and vendors are wanting that fuller system to basically design products around and/or target in the marketplace. But given that, and we've also talked about from a hardware availability standpoint, is you have hardware on the market now, future, like, shortly, and then, we can talk 1-2 years type of stuff. And so then there's this balance of how do we support both what's available now and then like more intermediate term and long term. And I think in order to do that in the end, what we have to end up doing is then allowing people to make those choices, right, in the marketplace itself. But I think decoupling here in the OSASE more from think of it more just like a BBR type of a thing, if we're talking about ARM, makes a lot more sense, and then allows that flexibility on the platform side of things and on the vendor side of things to choose who, or what they want to support when you bring it all together. But anyway, that was kind of the reasoning or my thinking about this. So I don't know. Response? No response?
I mean, I feel like that's a reasonable approach, and it's like that would be a little bit of a different direction than the current SE. And I think that if we're going to take out the line you highlighted and we're going to go with that direction, then we need to change the first paragraph that says that this is going to be the base for a binary compatibility between operating systems, because it's not. It would be one component of that, but it wouldn't be able to be that anymore. That wouldn't be sort of the ultimate overall goal. And again, that's sort of like I think a philosophical direction difference of this. And if that's the way the OSE is going to go, that's fine. But then there's also going to be, it's going to create a void that there is no such thing that's going to fill that at the moment. And we'd have to think about how that's going to be addressed.
Yeah, I would also have a question about that first part that talks about booting the OS. Obviously, booting is one component, but maybe I've lost track. But if this was intended to include the SBI as part of this specification, then that kind of goes beyond just booting, right? So booting is one component, but the scope actually goes beyond that. And as far as the comment about whether it adheres to a profile or not, I can see good points in going either way. I think the challenge with making it dependent on a profile, and I think Andre may have mentioned this before, is that there's going to be more in the profile than we might care about on the SEE side. That, to me, would be the rationale for. There may be some requirements in the profile that the SEE may not strictly depend on. For example, I think this was Andre's point.
Got it. Anyone have any comments and/or questions? Also we can just answer questions in chat, because I'm sure we have more people here in this room than we've ever had in our meeting before.
So I guess the question for me would be, if we didn't make it dependent on a profile, would we then pull in what we felt our requirements or dependencies would be into our spec rather than punting them to somebody else?
Or maybe there just needs to be like we don't have to depend on a specific profile, but we just need to say something that's sort of, this is a subset of the profile, because we're going to say, certainly like RV32 or RV64, we have to pick that, and maybe there's a couple more things, but we don't have to say the entire profile. Any profile that has at least this minimum set of things would be compatible, or something like that. So it's kind of like splitting the difference between enumerating everything and then, or just saying this one profile and nothing else.
But if we punt that out to a platform, then it really wouldn't matter then at that point, right? Because if you look at, like, we'll just say, for example, like a binary distro or something like that, then they're clearly targeting a particular, ISA at that point, right? And so if a particular, so if an OS vendor wants to target their product towards, a set of those things like ISA plus other potential platform requirements, and then this is just utilized for the purposes of both booting and, as you noted, Paul, runtime and that sort of thing, right? That's also a way to, target a particular product and largely it more, I would say, more closely mirrors how ARM has their ecosystem set up in that way, like with the BSA and things like that.
But I think there does have to be some minimum set of profile or profile-like or ISA requirements, because you can't just say, oh, this is whatever this thing is going to be, this boot thing is going to be completely agnostic to the architecture, because there's already, like, it has to be 64-bit, and it requires supervisor mode, and it requires, it probably requires A extension, and a handful of other things they seem kind of obvious, but they are specific different extensions, and if you didn't have them, it wouldn't work. So there is a minimum set that needs to be enumerated, and so there is some requirement. There is going to be some requirement. We can't just say it's going to be completely agnostic and you can just do it on anything, because you can't. You're going to have some requirements.
Yeah, and I guess ARM also has architectural conformance tests that they can rely on that we don't really have. So in that sense, maybe, the reason why ARM can get away with specifying less is because they can already take so much for granted, essentially.
Sorry, I was just taking notes. So, Darius, on that point, you're basically saying, oh, you need to target something, right? And I guess that's where it's interesting to figure out where we draw the line. Like, it's either be, your argument is you can't be completely agnostic if you're adhering to, certain interface, but like obviously the code that's running needs to match, right? It's really what it fundamentally comes down to. And I agree with that. I think the question is, does that get punted to platforms or not at that point? Because you can say, for example, SBI, UEFI, that sort of thing. You can make those calls. Now, what that ABI is where the rubber hits the road is when you actually have both instantiations of those. But do we need to tie the OSA SCE to that? And that, I think that was where Andre was largely suggesting to go and make it agnostic. And if I recall correctly, the BBR right now, from an ARM side of the world, does not necessarily specify that. It just says it needs to use one of the ISAs. I don't have it open right. Paul might get it open, but I don't have it open right now. But my recollection, it didn't have that. Yeah. We can just keep passing.
So, I mean, I understand, I guess that direction makes sense, but I think, and maybe this is just something that we need to get reviewed through, but reading through Andre's proposal, it seems like there's a sort of an incongruous mix of it should be all agnostic, but then it makes a whole bunch of very specific assumptions about specific hardware and not just profiles, but also like a specific particular kind of system description and stuff like that. So I don't.
Yeah. So I apologize for my imprecise language. When I said Andre's proposal, I was really meaning the things that he was saying in the meeting, not on that specific written thing. It was more when he was talking about the narrowing the requirements up the pyramid type of a thing, as you compose and stack stuff. And it was largely, if this is more foundational as a baseline, up at the top you can refine. And that would be basically bringing, if in that sense, the pyramid would be basically like the platform that brings everything together. You could then say, RVA 64 or RVA 23S64 or whatever, from a profile standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense, but there's a whole, like in his proposal at least, there's a whole lot of language of like, this has to be in supervisor mode. So I mean, I don't even know if any of that would even make sense.
So I wasn't even. Yeah, I agree with you. I was not trying to address the specifics on his proposals, just more in the general thinking of if it is foundational, it should be agnostic, and then you build on it as you compose these sets of requirements to build systems.
But I mean, can we even fundamentally do that? I mean, the S stands for supervisor, but like we're at least assuming that supervisor mode exists. So we have to. At least
yeah. There's
right?
some.
So we can't be completely agnostic. There has to be at least some set of requirements.
Yes, sorry.
Even at the very minimum, just supervisor mode. Right?
Understood. I was not. thinking in that, I was thinking more of a specific full profile as opposed to you have to implement certain architecture modes.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I guess
that's-
that's what, so maybe we don't want to go with a full profile, but we're going to need to at least say something.
Understood.
So whether it's a specific full profile that's a minimum subset, or it's a enumerated list of things that is not its own profile, but it's an enumerated subset, we're going to have to identify some things and spell them out and say whatever profile you pick has to be a superset of these things.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one, Darius. I think the question is how much comes in and how much would be specified by a platform. And the reason I say that is largely if you think about it, like where a lot of the vendors are looking for more, like I said, more system architectural behavior, right? Like some of those things may be in there versus here, but I agree we need to have some baseline TBD on what that is, obviously, but yes, I understand what you're getting at now. I apologize if I missed it before.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And I think it makes sense to maybe make that minimum, because I think that like as minimum as possible, even if it doesn't ever even make sense as a complete system, because that's kind of the at least that was my sense of what the direction of the SE was. It's just like the absolute base minimum. Not that there would ever be any systems that were ever designed for this, but like this is the actual things that it depends on, has to exist. Not that kind of makes sense or that would be logical or anything like that. It's just the absolute base minimum. And then anything beyond that would be something, a requirement come from a different direction.
Thanks, Darius. All right.
Yeah,
Okay,
I did.
Paul.
I did take a quick look at the ARM documents. You know, the BBR is specified to depend on the base system architecture, and the base system architecture has a bunch of
And that's what I was
platformy
saying,
stuff
and
in it.
that's where it comes into. It has all the platform stuff, but also has ISA, where we've specifically carved ISA out, and we don't have the system level, the rest of it. So, in the end, we need to build both products, from a software and hardware standpoint that work. Aside from, even from this software interface type stuff, we need to somehow compose that. However we compose it does not, obviously we've set it up to be different than how ARM did it, no big deal, but we do need all of at least those components that contribute in the end to the full shebang, if you will.
Is the platform work actually, I've lost track, so maybe this is a stupid question, but is the platform work ongoing, or is it basically not really spun up yet?
It is not spun up yet. So
that would be my concern about punting it. To
correct.
something
And
that doesn't exist.
so I think there is a high amount of motivation from various members that want to really pursue a platform. It is not spun up yet, but I do think we're going to have to do that right quick. Because people want to get products out, but not have a whole plethora of things that just don't work together, basically, right? So I think there is motivation there, and we need to pursue it. And that's what I was going to bring up in the Priv software group thing today later, was basically to get people to kind of discuss what they would or would not want and quickly write down things. But I do know that there are members that definitely want to pursue that now, so that they can build products and whatnot, or at least get things started in that direction to seed the ecosystem. Heinrich?
Don't worry, I got it. Yeah, I'm Heinrich Schuchert from Canonical. My question would be, what is the relationship between this team and the security-related team, which is thinking about having separate security realms? I mean, at some time from M mode, you have to spin up the different security realms and then have the security management, which would start things comparable to what OpT is now in the ARM world.
So you're asking how does that fit into this in general? I think they're somewhat orthogonal, or at least that's the hope, that from a layer separation standpoint, the operating systems that you would boot should be fairly agnostic to that, potentially. It doesn't preclude not to be have enlightened operating systems either to deal and interact, but in general, I don't think that it has a lot of impact. The app-TE, they're defining the interfaces for how to like spin up, trusted VMs and things like that. But that's something that can be done from an implementation standpoint, like more on the side. You can either do it or not, but it doesn't really have a large bearing on this, is how I think about it.
Yeah, when you think of this only as the API, then it's true. If you think it from the software perspective, like TFA is doing both, essentially, in the ARM world. And
Okay.
so
Well,
that would of course imply, okay, would OpenSBI still stand alone, or would there be some software that integrates what currently OpenSBI is doing and the spinning up of those different security regimes?
So Nick was saying that the app-TE API goes through the SBI as an extension. And to your point on bringing up OpenSBI, or I would say largely it's the SBI spec, RISC-V SBI spec, not an implementation. So how people build systems, that's up to them, is how I look at it. Like you could use OpenSBI, you could do other things, like you could implement something else differently, even in hardware, like a lot of, this is a stretch, but the way that RISC-V has largely been trying to provide their separation layers for privileges and stuff like that is that you could theoretically have an x86M mode and have RISC-V run on top of it, right? From a, I'm not saying that people are doing that, but like that's where like
You said it. There will be one system. With
yeah.
that.
But that's where I think the intent in general in RISC-V, at least is how I interpret it, is like use those interfaces and abstractions like all the time, and so that when you are building, people have the option to build different types of systems as long as they meet those interfaces and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty much like apt is just an SPI extension similar to any other SPI extension. So where you implement, how you implement, that's an implementation choice. Will OpenSPI implement it? Probably yes, but then there will be some other implementation also. So that's not the only implementation.
Any other comments, questions? I think we're at the time limit. I'm sure now that we have a whole bunch of people in the room, I'm sure we can all have conversations anyway, so no need for microphones necessarily. Anyway, thank you all. Appreciate it.